Hello there, folks, and welcome to the Jefferson Educational Society's Global Summit event, Escaping the Housing Trap, featuring Charles Marohn, the president and founder of Strong Towns and a best-selling author. For those of you I haven't had the chance to meet yet, I'm Ben Spagan, and I'm the vice president at the JES. Before we get into tonight's event, I'm going to do a few things here. I'm going to welcome you to the summit. I'm going to go over some housekeeping, and then I'm going to introduce Dr. Ewing, Sarah Ewing, Gannon University's provost, to offer a campus welcome, who will then introduce tonight's sponsor, the Erie Community Foundation, and Karen Billowith. Having welcomed you all to the summit and gone through some brief notes, we're already on to number 2, so we're making good progress here. After this evening's welcomes and introductions, we're going to hear from tonight's honored speaker. During the presentation later on, you're going to see some of our team members coming through the aisles. They're going to have index cards and golf pencils. They'll be offering those to you. You may have been offered that on your way through to the event. That is for the question and answer portion of tonight's event. They're going to collect those questions from you. They're going to give them to me because later I'll join Mr. Marohn on stage to help facilitate your questions. If you didn't get an index card or golf pencil and need one now, just simply raise your hand and one of our teammates will be able to help you. I'm going to work our way through as many questions from you, the audience, as we can, because we're so grateful that you're here tonight, have such an interest in tonight's topic. Of course, there are bonus points for good penmanship, because I'm the one reading them. So I appreciate that. Following tonight's event, there is going to be a book sale and signing. So if you want to get a copy of Escaping the Housing Trap, the Strong Towns Response to the Housing Crisis, our team will guide you over to room 219 here in the Waldron Campus Center, where tonight's presenter will be signing copies of that. Tonight marks event number 3 in a series of more than a dozen. Tomorrow we are right back here in the Yale room on Gannon University's campus in the Waldron Campus Center. We'll hear from Tristan Hogue of Boston Consulting Group, where among many things he co-chairs BCGX, the organization's tech build and design unit. He's going to be speaking on artificial intelligence. Where is the technology headed and how is it impacting businesses and consumers? That event closes out this week, but we'll be back next week, Tuesday, October 29th, for a conversation between best-selling authors Heather Cox Richardson and Tom Nichols as we explore the future and fate of democracy. In case you didn't know, Dr. Richardson has the most subscribed to Substack out there. And Mr. Nichols has the cover feature in the November edition of The Atlantic, a very timely discussion here in the end of October. Now, following that, on October 30th, we are proud to partner again with Gannon University to include this year's Gannon Reads event as part of the Global Summit. There we'll hear from Laura Schwartz, a critically acclaimed book she'll be focused on, Try to Love the Questions, From Debate to Dialogue in Classrooms and Life. For details on those events, including locations and start times, as well as all of the rest of the events that follow through Friday, November 15th, head over to our website, jeserie.org, or find one of our helpful team members, or if you're part of the Gannon family here on campus, head to gannon.edu. Okay, so if you're keeping track, I said I'd do 3 things, and that was the second, so on to the third. None of this would, of course, be possible without you, the attendees. I thanked you once, and I'll thank you again, and we really appreciate you being here, your thirst for knowledge, your desire to be part of a dialogue around a wide range of issues, from politics to the housing crisis to artificial intelligence to sports, so much and more. We are grateful for you. And of course, the summit wouldn't be possible if not for the continued and generous support of community organizations, from LECOM Health to Erie Insurance to Logistics Plus to PNC to the many others, including both our host here tonight, Gannon University, for our venue space, and tonight's sponsors, the Erie Community Foundation, along with support from Infinite Erie. You've heard me say it before, and I'll say it again and well into the future. I'm incredibly excited and honored to be here on the campus of Gannon University. I say that because I'm a proud Gannon University alum, but really you don't have to have been a student, a staff, or a faculty to appreciate the beautiful campus or the very warm welcome. So here to offer an official welcome to the campus, please join me in issuing a warm Global Summit welcome for Gannon University Provost, Dr. Sarah Ewing.
Good evening and welcome to Gannon University. As Ben shared, my name is Dr. Sarah Ewing and I am the Provost and Vice President for Student Experience at Gannon. On behalf of Gannon, I want to thank you all for joining us for this exciting event this evening. We are so proud to partner with the Jefferson Educational Society yet again to host this year's Global Summit, and we value and support their mission to bring globally important programs to our community that deepen our understanding and broaden our perspectives. We are even more proud that so many of our students, faculty, and staff can attend these events and engage in the programs and workshops associated with the summit as part of their educational and professional experiences. At Gannon, we are committed to providing an environment where our students can gain broader insight on important issues in the community at the community, state, federal, and global levels that affect us all. We are honored to partner with the Jefferson Educational Society to provide an opportunity to achieve just that, both for our students and our community. Tonight, I am reminded of the commitment of our students, faculty, and staff in supporting one of our additional vital community partners, the Our West Bayfront, and their mission in enhancing the quality of life of Erie's West Bayfront neighborhoods through thoughtful development, historic preservation, and neighborhood pride. Our Gannon family takes great pride in helping to establish safe, stable, and affordable housing for our neighbors. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Karen Billowith, President of the Erie Community Foundation, who will introduce tonight's honored guest. Karen.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to Gannon for hosting this event tonight and so many of the others in the Global Summit series. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to introduce tonight's speaker on behalf of both the Erie Community Foundation and Infinite Erie. But before I get to that, I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. I'm pleased to see the seats almost filled, especially because we're enjoying like the most amazing weather ever. So thanks to you for showing up. It's dark out now, but I'm sure it wasn't when you were on your way over here. So for those of you who I haven't met, I'm Karen Billowith, and proud to be President and CEO of the Community Foundation, and also the Chair of the Board of Managers for Infinite Erie. I want to thank Dr. Furky Ferrari and the board at the Jefferson Education Society for providing the Erie region with a forum that promotes civic engagement and innovative thinking, using the lens of Erie's history and experience to inform our shared future. That's really important now, maybe more important than ever. The Community Foundation's mission is to inspire, engage, and empower our communities through philanthropy and engagement toward a united and vibrant future. So the Jefferson is our partner in this work as it engages and empowers Erie's progress through research and discussion. In fact, it was through the Jefferson Society that Erie brought Bruce Katz to lead us in the development of Erie's investment playbook, and Infinite Erie is a direct result of that work. Infinite Erie is a collaborative effort to envision, plan, and align economic and community development activities in the county to move projects over the finish line and leverage resources. One of the priorities of Infinite Erie is neighborhood development, with goals to decrease blight, increase home ownership, and maintain a spectrum of housing options for Erie residents. It's not an accident that the Foundation and Infinite Erie are excited to present tonight's speaker. Charles Marohn is the founder and president of the nonprofit Strong Towns. He is a land use planner and civil engineer with decades of experience. He holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master of urban and regional planning, both from the University of Minnesota. Chuck, as he said I could call him, is the author of Strong Towns, A Bottom-Up Revolution to Rebuild American Prosperity, and Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, Transportation for a Strong Town. And as Ben said earlier, also Escaping the Housing Trap, which is the book he'll be signing tonight. Chuck also hosts the Strong Towns podcast and is a primary writer for Strong Towns web content. He has presented Strong Towns concepts in hundreds of cities across North America. And I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right. Planetizin?
I don't even know. Planetizin is what I would say.
named him one of the 15 most influential urbanists of all time. So I know we will be inspired by tonight's session and leave with ideas to engage and empower Erie to become stronger. So please join me in welcoming Chuck.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't really know how they pronounce Planetism either. As it is, for those of you that don't know, it's a planning geek website with strong recency bias. I was named number 10, but Thomas Jefferson was like 30. My daughters looked at that and said, "Dad, there's something wrong with this survey," which is a very fair assessment. Hello, it's very nice to be here with all of you. This is my fourth invitation to speak in your city. I've been here, I think the first one was over almost a decade ago. It's been a very nice return visit over and over. I'm from Minnesota, so your weather does nothing for me. It really bothers me because we are having 70s and 80s where I'm from too, and it's supposed to be cold. Like I'm a good Minnesotan. I've got all the wood brought in and stacked all nicely. I changed the oil in the snowblower. So I've done all the things that you're supposed to do to prepare for winter, yet no winter. So I don't know. Thank you for the nice weather, but let's get it on, right? All right. Are we in a housing crisis? When we ask people this question, that's the answer we get, right? People will say yes, broadly across the spectrum. But when we ask a follow-up question, to address this housing crisis, what needs to happen to housing prices? A lot of people say go up, and a lot of people say go down. In fact, a poll that Newsweek did last year said about equal numbers think up and down. It's interesting because when I speak to groups like this, there's always a lot of people who are shocked by that. Who are these people who think differently than me? Because we tend to fall into one of these two categories. Of course, housing prices must go up. Of course, housing prices must go down. The reason why we have this kind of split is because housing is really a function of two different conversations. There's one conversation going on in this country where housing is shelter, the place where we all live. Everyone needs shelter. Everyone needs a place to live. And people who look at housing through this lens say housing prices are way too high. Housing is unaffordable. Housing prices must come down. There's another lens to look at housing through, and that is the lens of finance. And through the lens of finance, housing is a financial product. Housing forms mortgages. Mortgages form secondary market products. Those products function on exchanges the way that other products do. And if housing prices do not go up, bad things happen. And if housing prices, Lord help us, should go down, all kinds of horrible things will happen. These are two different conversations, and there's very little overlap between the two of them. I can go give a talk with a group of housing advocates and go give the same talk in a group of housing finance people. And they are talking about ultimately the same thing, but in very, very different ways with very, very different values applied to them. In one of these conversations, housing prices must fall. In the other conversation, housing prices cannot be allowed to fall. And this is the essence of the housing trap that we have created. Everybody needs a place to live. This is the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food and shelter. We all need it. Yet we have made housing a central core part of our entire financial system. The base of our economy, the base of the reserves of our local banks, the base of our savings in pension funds and other investment vehicles is housing, or a derivative of housing products. In this scenario, housing cannot go down because if it goes down, our economy struggles, even fails. This is the trap that we have put ourselves in. And this trap makes us feel helpless. It makes us feel hopeless because all around us we can see the kind of outcroppings, the outpouring, the struggles that people are experiencing due to high cost of housing. Yet we also recognize that we live in this system where ultimately, when housing prices go down, things go really, really bad. I want us to understand how we got into this trap, because understanding the trap, recognizing why we are in this trap, will help us adapt to it and come up with our own approach here locally. If we look at the way that housing was financed before the Great Depression, it was very, very different than the way we do things today. We have our own recency bias. When we think about housing, we think of 30-year mortgages and the like. But this is not how housing has ever really been financed. Just modern times, this is how we do it. If you were going to buy a house before the Great Depression, you were going to get a loan to do that. In other words, you were not going to pay cash, you were going to get a loan. You were going to do that through a local bank. And local banks are very, very risk adverse. They're very, very conservative. And they were very, very conservative back in the 1920s because they were literally taking your dollars and lending them out to you. They were taking all of your money and lending them out to you. They were very, very risk adverse because the people in the community were the capital for the bank. And so if you were going to get a loan from a bank, the first thing that was going to happen is you were going to have 50% down payment. You were going to have a lot of skin in the game. You're going to have a lot of equity. They were not going to risk everybody else's money lending someone who didn't have a lot of skin in the game. Second of all, you were going to have a product that would be a very short-term product, a 3-year, 4-year, or 5-year loan. That loan would be interest only. And at the end of that loan term, you would have a balloon payment where you would either have to pay that loan off or roll it over into a new loan. The idea was the bank needed to be able to react to changing market conditions, higher rates of interest, lower rates of interest. They had to be able to roll that loan over. They couldn't take long-term risk. So short-term product financed locally. This all changed in the Great Depression. And the Great Depression, I think even today we lack some of the kind of personal understanding of how difficult a period of time this was. We look back at the Great Recession in 2007, 2008, and say that was a comparable crisis, but it was very much not comparable, right? One of the things that happened during the Great Depression is widespread housing dislocation. Lots and lots of people losing their homes. And they lost their homes for very simple, understandable reasons. If we look at the home values in the Depression, the first thing that happened during the Great Depression is housing prices started to fall. There were not enough buyers for homes, and housing prices started to fall. What happens when you have to refinance your home when the price has fallen? You will go to the bank, and the bank will say, all right, your 3-year, 4-year, 5-year loan is up. It's now rolling over. You've got to get a new loan. But we, the bank, will only lend you 50% of what your house is worth. Your house is now worth less than what it was when we made that original loan. So at this point, there's a gap between what you owe. Remember, you were paying an interest-only loan. There's a gap between what you owe and what the bank will lend you. That gap is the gap that you need to come up with cash to fill in the Great Depression. With 25% unemployment, with high interest rates, with massive dislocation, this is what you needed to do. A lot of people could not do this. And even though they were making their loan payments, even though they were current, even though they could have continued to make the payments over time, these people were kicked out of their homes. They were foreclosed on. What happens when a bank forecloses on someone? What do they do with the house? They sell it. What happens when you sell the house into a declining market? What happens to housing prices? They go down. What does that do to the next person who has to refinance? They have an even bigger gap. They get foreclosed on, their house gets sold, housing prices go down. It makes it harder for the next person, and on and on and on. Economists call this a deflationary spiral. And when we were in the Great Depression, what we saw with housing in particular is that we were caught in this deflationary spiral where people, for no fault of their own, were caught up in this bad economic situation where they were getting kicked out of their houses, being dislocated, having massive disruptions to our economy. At the beginning of the New Deal, the whole strategy of the Roosevelt administration was to try to end this downward deflationary spiral. One of the first things that FDR and the New Deal did with housing is to go to local banks and say, stop foreclosing on people. Don't foreclose. We, the federal government, will buy that loan from you. If the house is in foreclosure, we'll buy that loan. They then went to the local homeowners and they said, all right, you were making interest-only payments. How about we refinance that loan for you? And how about you make interest and principal payments and we'll spread it out over a longer period of time. Instead of 3, 4, 5 years, why don't we make it 8 years or 10 years or 12 years? You'll build up equity. You'll actually own the home when you're done. They then went to local banks and they said, we really need you to lend a lot more. We don't want you pulling back. We want you lending a lot more. So instead of having 50% down payment, how about we do 40%? How about 30%? How about 25% down payment? And we know that creates a lot of risk for you as a local bank. We know you're worried about that. We will write mortgage insurance to insure you against that loss. So if someone does default and you do lose money, the federal government will make you whole. Ultimately, we created an organization called Fannie Mae. Then we went to local banks and said, hey, we know you don't take long-term interest rate risk. The federal government is ready to do that on your behalf. So if you will write loans, write mortgages that meet certain criteria, we will create a market. And if you ever need to unload that loan, if you have the loan, for whatever reason, you need more cash, you need more liquidity, you want to make more loans, whatever it is, the federal government, as long as it's a qualified mortgage, will buy it from you. There is a market for this product that is, in a sense, limitless. Go ahead and write these long-term loans. All of these approaches and more stopped this deflationary spiral. It kept people in their homes. It stopped the dislocation. And in many ways, I'm going to use a word that we use in the book with a lot of intention, this is a very moral thing to do. A lot of people, through no fault of their own, were caught in this economic supercycle. We gave them the dignity of staying in their homes and allowing them, in a sense, a different way to finance their shelter. At the end of World War II, the big concern among economists, particularly around the president, was the end of the war and what that would do to our economy. Everybody in this room knows the thing that got us out of the Great Depression was World War II, right? And we all know that because we live in a country dominated by economists and economic thinking. Only economists would say, yay, global war, happy days are here again, right? Nonetheless, we're all taught in junior high that the thing that got GDP going again was this global war. Tens of millions of people dead, rationing of daily, needs. This was not happy times for people, but for economists, this was great. We had full employment, industry was booming, all arrows were pointing upward. As the war was coming to an end, the economists around FDR started to freak out. They said, when we demobilize millions of troops, when we shut down all these industries of war, there's nothing that's going to keep our economy from sliding right back into the Great Depression. If we just shut all this down, there's nothing different today than there was in 1935. And we're just going to go right back to where we were. Is that what happened? No, right? Of course not. We know what happened. Our troops came home, we shut down those industries, and we, in a sense, retooled around building a new version of America, a new way of inhabiting the landscape. We turned our cities into machines of growth, engines of growth, so that what we could pour into them was money for highways, money for infrastructure, money for commercial real estate development, and yes, money for housing. And when we added this liquidity to our cities, what we saw is that they would grow and grow and grow very, very rapidly. We still nostalgize this couple of decades after World War II as this amazing period of time of like bountiful growth and prosperity in our economy. What we did from a housing standpoint is we recognized that all of those tools that kept the economy from a deflationary spiral worked really, really well in the other direction. The stuff that kept our economy from going down, if we took it and retooled it, actually did really well to make our economy go up. We made it easier for more people to borrow more money and pay more for housing. You thought 30% down payment was good? How about 20%? How about 10%? How about 5%? How about no down payment? How about down payment assistance? You thought 8% interest rates was good? How about 7? How about 5? How about 3% interest rates? A 20-year mortgage, that was really good. How about a 30-year mortgage? All of these things were designed to make, and I'm going to use the word that we use today because they used it back then, make housing more attainable, make housing more affordable for people. When we could take that down payment and shrink it, when we could spread out the payments over a long period of time with lower interest rates, we could get more people to borrow more money and pay more for housing and grow and grow and grow our economy. This was ridiculously successful. In the decades after World War II, we saw our economy grow at unprecedented levels. At the same time, the federal government's debt barely went up at all. It went up to some degree, but nothing compared to the level of growth. What this allowed from an economist standpoint is our debt to GDP ratio was at record highs at the end of 2 world wars to come back down to what was considered acceptable levels. This is embedded in the way we talk about economics in this country today as the formula for success. We have a little bit of government intervention that can help boost the economy. We get secondary and tertiary growth out of this. The GDP grows way up, and our debt to GDP ratio goes down, and we are more prosperous as a nation. This is the equation that we use today every time we run into financial hardship. When we run into financial hardship, what do? We lower interest rates, we spend money on infrastructure, and in recent terms, we actually create money and improve the liquidity in our system. This is what we do in response to fiscal stress. What is left out of this equation, but is important to the story that we're going to have here tonight, is what happened to private debt. Because we didn't stop debt financing. What we stopped was government debt financing. What we did is we shift to private debt financing. So mortgage debt in those first couple of decades after World War II went up over 1,000%. We saw tremendous growth in private sector borrowing from the building of new homes, the building of new subdivisions, the building of this new version of America. Over time, what we have seen is that this strategy for growth has become more and more financialized, more and more financial looking. Housing has transitioned from becoming a product that serves us locally to a product that, in a sense, serves global financial markets. This is the Case-Shiller Index. This is an index of housing prices over time. This index starts in 1890 and runs to today. I've truncated it here at the end of World War II. So what you're looking at on the left is a little bit of volatility at the end of the war, and then this long kind of 2-decade period of stable housing prices. In fact, as we built that first generation of suburbia, that first generation of expansion, we actually have all those tools that economists point to of efficiency where we became better at building this stuff. We figured out how to get the wood and get the concrete and get the construction lined up and all that. And you see prices just like you would see for cell phones or personal computers or flat screen TVs. The price starts to drop slowly over time. Then we start to hit these periods of inflation. And what happens during inflation is exactly what economists knew would happen during inflation. Housing prices start to go up, interest rates start to go up, and these long-term loans start to go bad. Think about this from a bank's perspective, because there's a reason why long-term mortgages have never existed until recently, and that is because they are a horrible investment product. There's a reason why local banks don't want to hold them. There's a reason why they didn't exist naturally, or not naturally occurring financial product. If you are a bank, and let's say interest rates right now are at 5%, you need to pay 5% in order to attract depositors to your bank. you will pay depositors 5% and you will make a loan at 7%. And that difference is your profit, right? I'm oversimplifying, but that's essentially the model of a bank. But let's say that we go through a period of high inflation and interest rates go up as a result. Interest rates will go up because people will say, I'm losing money due to inflation. If I'm going to lend my money, I want more return. So interest rates go from 5% to, let's say, 8%. So now as a bank, you've got one of two choices. Choice number one is, I'm going to keep paying my depositors 5% because I lent out these long-term loans at 7% and I need to make that profit. What will happen to all your depositors? They will leave your bank. They will go to the bank up the street that's paying 8% or 9% interest. Then your bank will fail. That's called a bank run. The other option for you is to raise your depositors' rate of interest to something higher, 8%, 9%. Now you are slowly bleeding to death. You are getting 7% on this 30-year mortgage you've got out there, and you're having to pay out higher than that. You are losing money every month. This is the conundrum that banks found themselves in. And so what we see is a series of interventions. I'm going to call them what they were, bank bailouts, where the federal government made good on the promise that they made during the Great Depression to local banks. If you do things that don't make financial sense for you, when you get hard times, we will come to your rescue. And so the federal government created Freddie Mac. They created Ginnie Mae. These were institutions meant to buy these mortgages, to get them off the books. We did things like pump money into banks to allow them to lend, to increase their liquidity, to lower their reserve requirements. We went through a series then of bubbles, and each one of these, whether it was the inflation bubble in the 60s, early 70s, the one in the late 70s, early 1980s, the S&L bubble, or the one that we're probably all most familiar with, the subprime crisis. In each one of these, what you see is that housing becomes more and more and more a financial vehicle, more and more central to banks and bank operations and bank reserves. In fact, after the second inflation bubble, one of the things that we did is we said to local banks, you're required to hold bank reserves, cash, or treasury notes. We will make mortgage-backed securities, these bundling of mortgages. If you buy one of those and they're rated AA or higher, you can hold that as your security instead of cash, instead of a treasury note. This created, in a sense, an insatiable demand for mortgages. Anybody in the 2000 to 2008 period, anyone who could breathe could get a mortgage. And we needed mortgages so badly to create these secondary market products, these mortgage-backed securities, these bundling of many, many mortgages. Take your mortgage and your mortgage and your mortgage, and we'll bundle them all together. We'll cut them up into securities, and we'll sell those securities off so that if you buy one of these, you will get a tiny bit of 1,000 different people's monthly payment. We needed those so badly to keep the economy growing that we actually created something called the hypothecated mortgage, a fake mortgage that was basically modeled on an existing mortgage, just so we could have the financial product to run through the system. You'll notice that each of these bumps gets higher and higher and higher. I'm in a place where you all experience snow. I can't tell this analogy in Texas or Florida because they don't get it. But you all know what happens when you overcorrect on a snowy road, right? The first correction and then the second correction, and then pretty soon your car is vastly overcorrecting. This is what this feels like to me. What this means for us is that these are financial products. They are also shelter. But in our economy today, in 2024 in the United States, these are financial products. Primarily. They function like financial products. They are priced like financial products. They are more sensitive to financial markets than they are to local supply and demand. They also serve as shelter. And it is normal for all of us to experience housing as shelter like this, the single-family home, the multi-story apartment building. We experience these locally as shelter, but economically, their price reflects not supply and demand as much as it reflects the macroeconomic situation. And this is why, if we go to Silicon Valley, there's a housing crisis. If we go to Brainerd, Minnesota, where I'm from, there's a housing crisis. If we go to a small town in Oklahoma, there's a housing crisis. And if we go to Erie, Pennsylvania, there is a housing crisis. It's not because all of these places are experiencing the same local supply and demand dynamics. It is because all of these places are participating in the same macroeconomic market for housing. We think of the product as being the house and the customer as being the person. And we actually need to recognize that it isn't what is the product, it is actually who is the product. The product being bought and sold here is a promise that the next 3 decades of your earnings will be dedicated towards paying off a bond payment. That's what the primary product is. Where are we at in this story now? This is where we're at today. I want you to note a couple things. First, economists will call 2000 to 2008 a housing bubble. We have no hesitation in using that word. If you listen to Treasury officials, people at the Federal Reserve, economists writing white papers, they will with ease refer to the housing bubble, the subprime crisis, the subprime bubble. They will use the term bubble over and over. Those same economists will then call what happened subsequent a housing recovery. And they will use that word as well. In fact, you can see the people who were around at the time, whether it was Alan Greenspan or Ben Bernanke or Janet Yellen, who were central to both, you will see them use those words often in the same paragraph. We had a housing bubble, now we have a housing recovery. How do you recover to a bubble? What does that even mean? A bubble is what? It's an unreal distortion. It is a distortion of reality. It is something that should not exist. How do you recover to a bubble? When I say housing trap, this is what I mean. We're even trapped in our language. Housing prices cannot be allowed to fall, or all kinds of bad things happen in our economy. Here's what I want you to grasp from all this. Making it easier for more people to borrow more money, to pay more for housing, is not the answer. It might have been the answer at one point. And I'm going to go back to that word I used earlier, moral. I do think that there is a strong moral case to be made that during the Great Depression, this was the right thing to do. But we are a long, long, long ways from a humane and moral way of keeping people who were being victimized by a macroeconomic supercycle, by keeping them in their homes. In fact, today on Wall Street and in Washington, D.C., the financial product that is being pushed for is the 40-year mortgage. The idea that instead of lending to people over 3 decades, the federal government should expand the market and have Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie Mae purchase 40-year mortgages, again, to spread out those payments over a longer period of time, allowing people to pay more for housing because the payments will be the same. This is not a moral way to build an economy. This is not making people wealthy. This is not making people prosperous. This is not creating a healthy America. It's particularly not good for us at the local level because really, I love your city. I do like it. I feel like there's so much potential here, so much moving in the right direction. But there is no reason given your economic situation, that you should have a housing crisis. There's no reason that housing should be unaffordable in Erie, Pennsylvania. There's no reason why we can't have abundant affordable housing here. The reason is because we are trapped in this system. Let's talk about how we get untrapped. Is that a word? Untrapped? I've never used that word before. Yeah, let's break free. I like that better. I said these are financial products. I want you to recognize that if we look at a distribution of capital in our system, where do we have money in our housing system? There is bundles and bundles of money. There's a lot of liquidity. There's a lot of money for building these two products. If you want to go out and build single-family homes, if you are a single-family home builder, there's lots and lots of capital to back you doing this. You can get construction loans, you can get lots of financing. In fact, if you are a really big company, you can get lots of financing, hundreds of millions of dollars to build this kind of stuff. There is a bottomless market because there is immense demand for it. There is also a lot of liquidity put into building 5/1s and other types of apartment buildings. There are only a handful of builders that build the majority of this stuff. It's something like 25 builders build 75% of this stuff. But even if you're not one of those 25, there's ample amount of money around for you to borrow to build this type of stuff, to finance it. If you look at this as a low cost to high cost product, on the right side of this spectrum, the high cost, what we recognize is that wealthy people do not have a problem financing homes. They have lots of ways to access capital. Even if their wealth is not liquid, they can finance their homes. No one is worried about wealthy people not having shelter. Where we have no capital in our system, but we have tremendous, tremendous demand, is at the entry-level end of the spectrum. At the entry-level end of the spectrum, there is a massive, overwhelming amount of demand. And there are no financial products to finance the construction of that type of housing. And so we have a huge hole in our market. We have a massive, massive gap that our current market, as it is structured, is not serving. This is the gap that we focus on to break out of this housing trap. What does that gap look like on the ground? I'm going to give you 3 examples of homes that are in that gap. The first one is this here. This is a single-family home. They're very familiar to all of us. I want you to think of a person living alone in a house like this. They don't have to be elderly, but I think thinking of an elderly person is a good way to think about this. 2 out of 3 homes in our country, more than 2 out of 3, are single-family homes. So these are homes with multiple bedrooms, multiple bathrooms. But 2 out of 3 families in this country are single-person or 2-person households. In other words, they don't need multiple bedrooms. There are a lot of people who are living in a house today that they've lived in for decades, that they don't want to move. They like their neighborhood. They like their neighbors. They have relationships there. Maybe they go to church up the street or they volunteer somewhere. They don't want to move. They have memories in this house. Yet they are house rich and cash poor. They struggle to shovel the sidewalks in the winter when it snows. They struggle to mow the yard in the summer when it needs mowing. They need money to fix the roof, but they're on a fixed income. They need money to repair the heater, but they don't have the cash. The standard system today would say, hey, how about a reverse mortgage? How about this kind of fancy financial product? Yeah, I know you've heard of people getting kicked out of their homes with these. Don't worry, you won't. There's a lot of people who burned their mortgage and made a big deal out of it. The idea of taking on a reverse mortgage where they slowly lose their home is very unappealing to them, regardless of the math. You could get a home equity loan, in which case you're making payments out of money you don't have. These are the options on the table today through our financial system. If we went back 100 years ago in Erie, Pennsylvania, there was another option that was not only on the table, but was very, very common. What was very common for families to do, especially families that were house rich and cash poor, was to take one of their spare bedrooms, put in a kitchenette, an exterior door, and then rent it out to someone who needed a place to live. Think about this transaction. We can literally do this in a weekend. This is not hard work. We could build this kind of unit for a few $1,000s. None of this is expensive. None of this is difficult. You would get someone housing. It would not be through a corporate lender or a corporate renter. You're not going to get your rent raise in the mail or by email. You're going to be talking to the person in literally the same house as you. And imagine this transaction too from the status of the homeowner. I'm house rich, I'm cash poor. Now I've got cash income coming in. You know what? I'm willing to reduce the rent a little bit if you shovel my sidewalk. I'm willing to reduce the rent a little bit if you mow my yard. It would be really nice if you could take me to the grocery store a couple times a month. Could I call you if I have an emergency and need to be taken to the hospital? These are all very human, very humane, very moral kind of things that we have made illegal. This is called a duplex. This is not allowed in most of our neighborhoods. This would be illegal to construct today. Something that families did for thousands of years, we have made impossible to do from a regulatory standpoint. This is something called a backyard cottage. Do not call this an ADU. ADU is the planner term for accessory dwelling unit. It sounds like a disease that people don't want to catch. Everyone understands what a backyard cottage is. I want to point out something about backyard cottages. If you go to extremely wealthy neighborhoods, you're going to see two things that we are all told no wealthy person wants. You're going to see small lots, and you're going to see lots of backyard cottages. You're going to see both of those things in abundance. Again, this is another way to take excess yard space. You are yard rich and cash poor, and turn it into cash. These are very small units, a few hundred square feet. Again, very humane. We can think of this as a granny flat, they're sometimes called. My mother-in-law is going to move in with us. She would like something that would be independent of us. She can be around to watch the kids. She can also have her own space, get a little bit of distance, but yet we're close. Everybody seems comfortable with that. If it's the kid who's coming home from college and going to live here for a couple years and save some money while they get on their feet, we're fine with that. But if it's the random college kid or the guy going through a divorce who needs a place to stay for 4 months, that freaks us out for some reason. It's the same thing, right? It's the same thing. Backyard cottages are something we can, again, do at scale. These are really, really easy to do. The sewer's there, the water's there, the infrastructure's there, the electricity's there. Everything that you need is there. It's literally often just taking a garage and putting in a kitchenette and some plumbing and allowing it to be rented out. We can do this at scale. We can do it very, very cheaply. This is a starter house. Please don't call these tiny houses. Tiny houses are like clown cars, right? They're like this fetish thing that we have. Oh, look at the cute little tiny house. The reality is that for thousands of years, humans built starter homes. They built small houses. And when they saved up a little bit of money, because they've got a house they could afford, they saved up a little bit of money. I know, a novel concept, but that's what families used to do. They would then put an addition on. They would have a kid. They'd put on a second story. The neighbor would come over and help. They would go over and help their neighbor. This is the way we built neighborhoods literally around the world for thousands of years. If you go through your old neighborhoods here in Erie, you will see starter houses everywhere. Now, they're no longer 400, 500, 600 square feet. They're now 1,000 square feet, 1,200 square feet, because they started small and they were been added on to. If you look, you'll see the starter house in there sometimes. You can see the additions on it. It's there. When we don't allow people to start with something they can afford, we rob them of the ability to participate in society. We can build these at a much different price point than what builders are going to be delivering homes for the secondary market today. How many of you want to live in a 400 square foot house? Okay. How many of you at some point in your life have lived in a 400 square foot place? Look at that. When we don't allow these to be built, when we don't allow these to fill in the gaps between our buildings, when we don't allow these to be put on lots that are existing with sewer and water and roads and sidewalks and all the infrastructure that we have to maintain, when we don't allow those new taxpayers to come in and participate in that burden, we are not only doing damage to them, we are doing damage to ourselves. This is something that we should be doing at scale. We can build these kind of units. We can build thousands of them. We can meet the market demand, and we can actually shift the market here to be responsive again to us. Because if we look at all the people trying to get housing today at that entry level, there's a massive, massive amount, and there's no product. If we get those people into houses, it might not be the place they want to end up, but they can now participate in the traditional market, or the market that we all understand, the 30-year mortgage, the 40-year mortgage, maybe someday the 50-year mortgage market. They can participate in that from a position of strength. They can have savings. They can have optionality. They're not forced into that because it's the only place they can get. We can actually dramatically change the market if we build these entry-level products at scale. How do we do this? At Strong Towns, and in the book, we talk about 3 things we need to do. 3 things that we can do here locally. And I'm just gonna, let me pause here for a second and say this. I'm from Minnesota. Minnesota is one of these Midwestern places. We're not East Coast, we're not West Coast. From where I sit, there's a lot of dissonance when I go east and when I go west. That's not to suggest we have everything figured out. We really do not. But the things we struggle with are different than the things that you all struggle with here. The one thing that I encounter every time I come east, and really the closer I get to the original 13 colonies, particularly here in the Northeast, the more pronounced this is. There is a kind of within local government, within city structures, there's a very dominant kind of vertical, hierarchical system in play. We tend to look for answers in Harrisburg. We tend to look for answers out of Washington, D.C. We tend to look outside. At Strong Towns, we have a very different view of local government. And I actually feel this aligns with what most people think. But not often the options we're presented with. At Strong Towns, we talk about local government not as the algae in a food chain of governments, right? The lowest level of government. What we think of local government is the highest level of coordination amongst people working together in a community. And if we can look at local government as that function, if we can look at the things that we're doing here locally as serving each other, and allowing us to serve each other better, what it does is it opens up a ton of possibilities for us to solve our own challenges, to address our own problems. I was talking to people ahead of the event here tonight, and someone told me about a prior speaker that you had a few years back who came here and used the term, the Calvary's not coming. Nobody's coming to save you. Nobody from outside is going to solve your problems. And I guess I would reiterate that here tonight. You live in a housing crisis that is the same housing crisis as everybody else has. And to the extent that we're stuck in this economy where housing prices can't go down, or if you remember George W. Bush in 2008, the quote that I always remember is he said, they told me this sucker's coming down. And I remember thinking, if this sucker's going down is one of the options on the table, that's a pretty bad system. We can stay beholden to that system and wait for someone else to fix it, or we can do things that are within our grasp to do and actually change things on the ground for us. And so I want to talk the rest of the time here about what those things look like. There's 3 things we need to do. The first one is we need code reform. We need local regulatory reform. The second thing is we need to build an ecosystem of incremental developers. And the third thing is we need to localize the finance of those entry-level housing units. Let's talk about the first one. These are 3 photos of Front Street in Brainerd, Minnesota. That's where I'm from. The one on the left is from 1873. The second one, the one in the middle, is from 1904, and the one on the right is from 1939. These are the same street in 3 different time periods. What I'm demonstrating here, what I'm trying to show, is this idea that cities, in order to be productive, in order to be strong, in order to be successful, need to be able to evolve and change. They need to be able to mature and grow. They need to be able to react to stress and opportunity within neighborhoods. When we lock neighborhoods down through zoning codes, through building codes, through regulation, through lots of red tape, through lots of permitting processes, and we say it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to change this neighborhood in any way, what we do is we condemn every neighborhood to a long, slow decline. I look at your city, and I look at a lot of your neighborhoods as being neighborhoods that passed through the infant phase and got to like the toddler phase, and then we came in and clamped down on them and said, you cannot grow anymore. And so you've been stuck with this like sick toddler for decades, wanting to grow up, wanting to mature, wanting to become an adolescent, a preteen, right? But we said, no, you can't do that. Our zoning codes will not allow it. Our building codes will not allow it. No, you can't take that 4th bedroom you have and rent it out. Apostasy, that is a duplex. Duplexes make us sick. We can't do that. We have to allow every neighborhood to evolve and change. Now, at Strong Towns, we recognize that there is something scary to people about change. There's also something deeply unhealthy about some of the ways that we do change today. Often in our system, we have something that housing advocates call the grand bargain. And I hate the grand bargain. The grand bargain goes like this. All of you want single-family home neighborhoods, and you want your neighborhood to never change. Okay, you can all have that. So long as we agree that your neighborhood, and just your neighborhood, is going to radically change. Now, your neighborhood is the disenfranchised one, the one with the poorest people, the people who are kind of marginalized in our community. You're going to be the victim or the prey to the predator, but we're going to sacrifice you so that all of you can enjoy stagnation. This is a deeply dysfunctional way to think about a city, because not only is this underlying unhealthy for all of you, it's really bad for your neighborhoods long term. It is horrible for your neighborhood, because the neighborhood that becomes the prey, all the prices go berserk. The houses are now either going to be slumlords or just land speculators waiting for that next big redevelopment opportunity. You get no investment in that neighborhood. And in every place else, you are also starved of investment. At Strong Towns, the grand bargain that we propose is this. No neighborhood can be exempt from change. Every neighborhood has to allow the next increment of development intensity. If you are a neighborhood of single-family homes, there should be no regulatory friction for your neighborhood to become a neighborhood of duplexes. In exchange, no neighborhood should experience radical change. No neighborhood should be prey to the predator of large capital flows into the community. No neighborhood should have all the neighbors bought up and get a 6-story condo renovation. It is not a healthy way for us to build. And so if we can look at that grand bargain, the way we respond to that locally, regulatorily, is we need to make it really, really, really easy to build that next increment. If you have a single family home, there should be almost no regulatory friction for you to convert that into a duplex. Almost none. And the standard that we use is you should be able to show up at City Hall at 9 a.m. with a completed building permit and walk out by noon with a permit and start building. I always get a few people who laugh at that, like, that's impossible. It's not impossible. There are places that do it. We can do it here too if we have a commitment to seeing it done. And that is the type of regulatory environment we need for that next increment. And let me be very, very clear. If you have a house with 4 bedrooms, and you have 2 parents and 3 teenage kids living in that bedroom, you are going to have 5 cars parked in that place, and no one is going to care. And if you switch that to have 2 parents and 1 renter, you are going to have fewer cars there than you did with 3 teenagers. And everyone's going to flip out. We have to not flip out. It is literally the same thing. I'll say one last thing about parking. You are cursed with way too much parking. And I feel happy because it feels like, you can affirm this or not, it feels like you have made a lot of progress in my last 2 trips around parking. I think you're charging more for parking now than you were. I think you're becoming more sophisticated about it. Every time you see parking, what you are seeing is a place with massive investment of public infrastructure and very little tax base for you. That parking lot is not creating any jobs. It's not creating any homes. It's not paying substantial taxes. Yet you have hundreds of thousands of dollars of sewer, water, street, all that in that space. That is a non-performing asset in your portfolio. The more that you cling to parking mandates and subsidies and requirements, the more you will signal to people that we are not serious about dealing with housing. And let me put it like this. Often we are really, really sensitive to the harm or the stress of having to walk a block or, heaven help us, 2 blocks to get to where we want to go. We are very sensitive to that stress, but we are rather insensitive to the stress that people have of not being able to afford a house. And I'm not even talking about people who are homeless or people who are struggling to get into that first house or that entry-level house. I'm talking about middle-class people, even upper-middle-class people. Everybody in the system is being stretched way further than they want to be when they're buying a, way further than is comfortable when they are buying a house. We are somehow indifferent to that stress, yet really, really sensitive to the stress of having to walk a block or 2 after you park. What I want us to do is flip that sensitivity around. I want us to be really, really sensitive to the idea that we need to make housing a lot more affordable. We need to build a lot more housing. And those empty parking lots, those half-filled spaces are the easiest place to start. And I want us to become a lot less sensitive to the idea that someone may have to walk half a block or a block or 2 blocks to get to where they need to go. We need to create an ecosystem of incremental developers. People who will actually do this work. I talked to someone today before the meeting and they said, yeah, we go talk to the developers in our community and they will say, I can't even start a house unless it's going to be $350,000. And guess what? They're not lying to you. They're not lying to you. The products that we are building, the products that we are financing, the products that have a secondary market to them, the products that the banks will finance and then sell off to bundlers who will then, securitize it with other mortgages from around the country, cut it up into securities, hypothecate it, sell it off to different investors and pension funds. Yes, those things you cannot build here at affordable prices. It just cannot be done. We need different developers. Not saying the ones we have are bad. They keep building the products they're building. It's great. They've got a market. They've got a job. We actually need to create a different developer who are going to build the types of units that we need to be built. Who are these incremental developers? This is the fascinating thing because there's a lot of people sitting here in this room who would be interested in doing this kind of work, but are not doing it now. A lot of incremental developers are people who are underemployed and have a side passion they would like to follow. It's someone who sees the house up the street in disrepair and thinks, I could buy that and fix it up and do something with it. It's a teacher who has summers off and is willing to take their time and the weekends, maybe some evenings, and work on a side project. It's someone who is pounding nails on a construction crew today but says, I think I could do this myself. The interesting thing about these incremental developers is that when you ask them what is stopping them from doing it, they'll usually say 1 or 2 little things. Being a developer, an incremental developer, requires you to be kind of like a Renaissance person. You've got to know about how to finance and how to put together a pro forma. You've got to know how to get through city hall regulations. You've got to know how to write subcontracts and oversee contractors. You've got to know a little bit about plumbing, a little bit about construction, a little bit about shingling. You got to know a little bit about everything. Everybody who comes to the table as an incremental developer is missing some bit of knowledge. What we find is that when we get people together, they fill in the gaps. Who is an incremental developer? They're literally everywhere in your city. And the way we activate them is we just get them together. In the book, we profile South Bend, Indiana, where they brought incremental developers in, got them talking to each other. And what you see is that they all teach each other what to do. Oh, you had trouble getting financing? Go talk to my banker over here. He's really great. Oh, you had trouble with a plumber? You know what? I know a really good plumber. Let me help you out. These people are competitive because they're working in the same market, but they're really not. Because their competitor is the big financer, the big developer, the person out building the big homes. They're building a completely different product. And the more they can grow the market for the product, the more they benefit. This is not hard to do. It just takes a little bit of local commitment. There's a group called the Incremental Development Alliance that trains these developers. This is easy stuff for us to do. The last thing we need then is we have to localize our finance. And I'm going to show you some ways that people have done this. I'm going to start with Oswego, New York, which I'm rarely in this book tour. I've not been up in this part of the world yet. This is my first trip to Pennsylvania with this book tour. And I know you can actually drive to Oswego from here. So if you get the chance, go and chat with them because they're doing amazing things. And my understanding is that your city here too has also adopted some of these approaches. In Oswego, they had what they called a bank run on confidence. They had neighborhoods that were in decline that needed some love, but when they would talk to people there, they would say, I really like my neighborhood, I really like my place, but I don't think anybody else does. And so I'm kind of holding back. What they did is they came up with a micro grant program, really small grants. And to get a grant, you had to do two things. One, whatever you were going to do had to be visible from the street. People had to be able to see it. You couldn't insulate your house or fix the boiler, like whatever it was, had to be visible from the street. They wanted people to see it. The second thing is you couldn't apply as an individual. You could only apply as a block. So you had to have 70% of the people on the block as part of the grant application. And what this did is that all of a sudden, one block would just get nicer overnight. And then bam, another block over here would get nicer overnight. And pretty soon, blocks were just improving randomly. And it wasn't one house here, one house there. It was a whole block at once. And it signaled to everybody else, hey, this neighborhood has a future. This neighborhood is on the rise. This neighborhood is a good place to be. So go ahead and take your time. Go ahead and take your energy. Go ahead and take your capital and put it into your own place. Because if you invest in your own place, the neighborhood's not in decline. You're not going to lose it. The neighborhood's going in the right direction. So go ahead, be confident, and show your place some love. They have spent pennies and gotten massive amounts of private investment. And here's the best part of it. Not only has it been massive in private investment, they have not displaced anybody. This is the kind of investment that doesn't kick out 5 people in order to bring in 10. What it is it makes everybody in the neighborhood better over time. In Muskegon, Michigan, they have come up with a very innovative way to use tax increment financing to build starter homes. Tax increment financing is, in short, if you have a vacant lot that's paying this much tax, and when you build a home, the tax goes to this, that difference is called the tax increment. They take that increment and they'll dedicate it to a loan. So the city will actually go get a loan, make the payments on that loan with that increment. That's new tax money they've got coming in. And then they'll use that loan to pay down the down payment of the house. They've been able to lower starter homes. So these are small homes on vacant lots with existing sewer and water, so no big infrastructure commitment. They've been able to lower housing down payments by 20% or more for people getting into those 800, 900, 1,000 square foot starter units. In California, they have actually built so many backyard cottages that there now is local financing industry around it. If you do enough of these, you can actually create what is essentially a secondary market. If you go into a used car lot and you look at a car for a little bit, someone will come up with a clipboard and say, you want to take that one home? Just sign here and you can do it. In California, they built so many of these backyard cottages that you can go to a backyard cottage lot. The guy will come up with a clipboard and say, you want that unit? You sign here, and you can actually, they'll have it set up on your place in 60 days, and you can start collecting rent. That's a pretty liquid market. In Minnesota, our cities are allowed to use special assessments. I'm pretty sure you can do this here as well. We think of special assessments as being, we're going to go out and build a road, and then we'll assess the property owners for their cost of that road. We can go out and build a backyard cottage. We can create that accessory apartment out of that fourth bedroom. We can do these things, and the city can actually finance it the same way they finance a road construction project. The city can go get a bond, the city can pay for it, and then the city can collect it from you on your taxes. Here's the fascinating thing about this. For special assessments and for tax increment financing, if you get a primary mortgage and a secondary mortgage and you default, the primary mortgage gets paid back first before the secondary mortgage. If you have a special assessment, that gets paid back first. So all of this thing about the city borrowing money, using it to pay down housing, and then collecting it back from you over time, all of that is essentially risk-free for the city. We are the first ones that get paid. If there's any default, there's very, very, very little risk. And the city can do this indefinitely because cities can borrow insane amounts of money. In Florida, we have seen cities and to some degree philanthropy co-signing on housing products. If you want to build that backyard cottage, if you want to create that accessory apartment out of your fourth spare bedroom, you can go to the bank and get a home equity loan and go through all this mess. The interest rates are going to be high and all that. The city can come in and actually co-sign the loan with you and essentially back the loan the same way your rich uncle did when you were a kid and needed your first car or whatever it was. The city can actually fill that function with you and allow the bank to issue a loan that they may not otherwise want to do for a housing product that we know is in high demand in the market. We are coming out with a workbook next year that goes over these. We have a whole chapter about this in the book, but there's been so much interest in this financing part. We actually feel like we need to supplement a little bit. I want to end with this. Local governments and philanthropy can help finance and really must help finance. There is no one who's going to make that market happen unless we do it. Low cost, high quality housing. We can do it at scale, and we can do it at no cost to our taxpayers, at no cost to our city. We can do this in a way that is very, very secure, and we can do it at scale. That gap in the marketplace is one that we can fill. We just need to be bold enough to do it. I'm going to end there. I want to end with this last thought. I know we all are I'm going to say this as an outsider, as someone who has visited here a few times. I come from a very poor city. Every time that there's an unemployment update, my town leads the state in unemployment. And by leads, I don't mean leads as in good, I mean leads as in bad, right? We are one of the cities that struggle the most. We're a very old city. We are next to the new suburb city where all the flashy Costco and Home Depot and all those people have gone. My city is starting to wake up to its value. It's starting to wake up to what a great place it is. It's starting to wake up to how unique its neighborhoods are, how financially productive they are, how with just a little bit of love and a little bit of attention, we can actually start to turn things around in a big way. In order to make my city successful, to make Brainerd, Minnesota successful, you don't need big flashy projects. You don't need massive investments. You don't need huge risks. You don't need the city to be the dumb money at the card table, losing again and again and again. You actually just need to take care of business. You need to take care of infrastructure. You need to maintain stuff. You need to show a little bit of love to your neighborhoods, and you need to give people confidence that you actually care about their place. When I come here, I feel the same exact way. This is a city with tons of potential. This is a city with great bones. This is a city with great neighborhoods. And the thing that it needs more than anything else is for all of you who love this place, because I get that from you all the time, how much you love it. I need all of you who love this place to actually have confidence in it as well. If you have confidence in this place, you can do amazing, amazing things. So thank you for the invitation to be here. Oh, okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, how about another round of applause for Charles Marohn? Chuck. That was terrific, and I know you said your friends call you Chuck, and I think you've
Please.
got some 200 of them here tonight, and we're
I
so
hope so.
grateful that you had a chance to spend time with us. Folks, I'm going to get through as many of your questions as I can. If yours didn't get collected yet, our team's going around. They'll get them up to me. One of the first ones came up is a two-parter. It's a when and a why. When, because this wasn't your first book, when did you decide you had to write a book about the housing crisis? And then the second part is why? Why you?
Ooh, okay. So I started writing a blog in 2008, and pretty shortly after that, I'm very fortunate. I started to write, things started to get passed around. We're in this internet age, and so an engineer from the middle of Minnesota would not have been heard 10 years earlier, but I was in this age where everything started to go viral and people started to read it. I had agents reach out to me and say, you should write a book. And I'm like, cool, that would be awesome. I'm kind of like organizing my thoughts. And every book proposal that I put together was like War and Peace. It was like 8,000 pages. I finally got a publisher, Wiley, who helped me organize it. And I actually put it into 5 books. So there's a little George Lucas to this, when he's like, I want to do Star Wars in 6 movies. And they're like, no, just do 1. They're like, just do 1. And I actually have a 5-book deal with Wiley to publish 5 books. The first one is Strong Downs on the finance of cities. And then I wanted to write about how cities grow and how they develop. And so the second one's on transportation, the third one's on housing. The fourth one will be on economic development, and the fifth one is on the structure of local governments. That is, to me, is like simple. The harder question is, why me? And I have to say that I ask myself that question a lot. I feel very awkward sometimes doing this work because I'm an engineer who is not a very good engineer, right? Like I got a degree in engineering. I was trying to, this is probably more than you want to know, but my wife and I dated in junior high and high school and college, and I wanted to be a drummer in a band, but I had to be serious about it. This girl was going to marry me and her family was going to say yes. And so like engineering is pretty serious, right? So I became an engineer, but I found I was not very good at it. I asked too many questions. I would just not, I could do the work, but it didn't get me. Part of it that did get me was the city building part and the planning part. And so I went back to grad school and I became a planner. And I found myself not really thriving there either. There was a lot of kind of zoning work and just processing a paper, and it lacked something. And so in 2008, in the housing crisis, I started to write. And I just tried to explain why cities were going broke. And to me, I thought a lot of this was obvious and that people would just laugh at me. I started to realize over time that this was a shared experience that we all had, and we just didn't have the language to talk about it. And so I've found myself as this kind of spokesman for Strong Towns and the Strong Towns movement and these set of ideas. I feel often like I am explaining to people how paper clips work and how like Post-it notes work. Like this is, when I say it, it's very obvious to people, but we lack sometimes the language because we live in this system and it's hard, I think, to question it.
So you're a drummer. Last year we had Richard Florida, who's a guitarist. I think next year if we get a bassist, then we're a singer away from putting together a band and solving.
I'd love to play in a band with Richard Florida. That would be super cool.
So next year,
cool.
folks, we're going to bring that to I'm just kidding. So back to the serious stuff, though. I'd love for you just to say this again. This is my question, and there are some on the parking, but could you just say the parking bit again for Erie? Do we not have enough yet? Should we have more?
You have way too much parking. And understand what we did. At the end of World War II, when we started to build suburbs, the suburbs were immediately more successful than the cities. And in fact, we did this thing, and I get into this in the first book, but we changed the economics of cities and dropped their value tremendously by basically opening up massive supplies of land. Cities were always, in a sense, constrained. in their growth and development. And by building highways and building stuff way out, we massively increased the supply of land and then decreased the value. And it really gutted our cities. At the same time, we went out and we looked at all those suburbs and we said, these are the places that are successful. What do they have going on? And planners love to measure things. And so they said, you know what I see going on? They've got lots of parking. We don't have enough parking here. And we can actually measure how much parking they have. So they would go out to that bowling alley, or they would go out to that elementary school, or they would go out to the hair salon in the suburbs that was doing awesome. And they're like, well, every chair they've got in the hair salon, they've got, 3 parking spaces. So in the middle of the city, in a walkable neighborhood where you've got a bus going by and like the dynamics are completely different. If you want to open a hair salon, for every chair you've got to have 3 parking spots. Well, what that meant is that no salons got opened. Or if they did, they had to rip down half the neighborhood in order to do it. And so what we have done is we've denuded and destroyed our cities with standards that never applied there.
So you're talking about standards and zoning that's come up a couple of times. Here in Pennsylvania, we're blessed with a lot of things. Local government happens to be one of them. We've got 38 municipalities in this county alone. Some would argue that we should consolidate. We should reduce the number of governmental bodies that we have. What say you, Chuck?
If you type Strong Towns consolidation into Google, you will find a number of stories I've written about Pennsylvania because you are the epicenter of this conversation in this country. It's the loudest here than it is other places, although other places have had it. If you have an inefficient, unproductive business model and you merge 2 unproductive, inefficient business models together, you buy yourself time, but you make your problem worse. I think consolidation is the worst idea that you could have. But I understand where it's coming from. You're looking at your problem as one of efficiency. It's not. It's productivity. Your cities are not productive, and consolidating them will not solve that. It will only patch it over for a little while, and then the problem will be even worse on the other side. I'm not saying that there aren't ways to work cooperatively, and I'm not saying there aren't benefits to working cooperatively, but I would push for different reforms than consolidation.
So we've got folks in here that I think have been mid-career, maybe end of their career, but we've also got students about to enter their career. Undoubtedly, the pandemic has indelibly changed how we work. This person's curious about how work-from-home employees are impacting city centers in the housing crisis. What do you see there?
Oh, when you were describing that, I picked up on something different in my brain.
Go there first and then come back to this one.
I have 2 daughters. One's a sophomore in college and one is a senior in high school. I've got nieces and nephews that are older. And I'm watching them enter the workforce. And one of the things that breaks my heart is that the jobs that they're getting are work from home jobs. I can't imagine being a 22, 23, 24-year-old, getting up from my bed, going to the other side of the room and sitting at my desk, and then going back to my bed at night. You learn so much in a workplace. You learn so much from your colleagues. How do I work? What's the expectation? What does a 15-minute break look like? All these things that are like the unwritten rules of how you work, you learn on the job from other people. I think that work from home is brilliant. It's a great opportunity for us. Strong Towns has always been remote. We have 21 people now on our team and they work all over the country. And then we get together a couple times a year. But that getting together a couple times a year is so important because you've got to build a culture. You've got to help people like learn from each other. I feel like work from home, the biggest advantage it has for us is that when we build great neighborhoods, people can live in those neighborhoods with fewer cars. If you take a family and a family is able to go from 2 cars to 1 car, you dramatically change the economics of that family. You instantly give that family $5,000, $8,000, $12,000 a year extra that they otherwise wouldn't have. They can spend more on a house, they can spend more for savings, they can enjoy other things in life. Having work from home along with better neighborhoods is really, really liberating for families. I do feel like I don't want my kids to do it until their 30s, right?
So get them on the road in their 20s, then 30s, expand. All right, but sticking with the housing crisis, this one's asking, in your book, did you see other social determinants of discrimination that factor into financing and local bank participation? Things that stood out to you, or is this a problem on the whole for everyone?
So obviously we have this legacy of redlining, and we talk about it in the book, but we don't focus on it in the book. I think our take on it is maybe a little bit different than some of the other books that have come out recently that have focused deeply on it. If we go back to the Great Depression, the Homeowners Loan Corporation was the group that, when I said earlier, went to banks and said, hey, don't foreclose, we'll buy that loan. And then we'll, issue a longer mortgage. They did that. And one of the qualifying things, one of the things that the federal government said, hey, we'll back that loan. The loan's got to be in a good neighborhood. And we'll let you, the local people, go out and make these maps. And we want you to make the good neighborhoods green and blue on the map and the bad neighborhoods yellow and red. What happened was, in many cities, in fact, I've not seen a city with a redlining map where this didn't happen, the poorest, most disenfranchised, and often the minority neighborhoods were the ones that were made red. What this did is it just starved them of capital. It took, this neighborhood will flood with capital, this neighborhood gets no capital. If you want to buy or sell a house in this neighborhood, tons of liquidity, like go ahead, easy. If you want to do it in this neighborhood, you've got to have cash, really hard to do it, made the prices down, the transactions, made it really hard to build wealth. That reflects through, and we see it over and over again. We were part of a study in Kansas City where the historical redline neighborhood today had a productivity of around 150,000 an acre, where right across the street where you had the green or the blue neighborhood, they were 8, 10, 12 times higher in value today, that residual from the 1920s and 1930s. So we do see it. I do want to say this. I feel like if you read the first book, Strong Towns, we get into this pretty deeply. In most cities, the neighborhoods that we would look at as being disadvantaged, that we would look at as being kind of like the less valuable places, tend to be the most productive places. They also tend to be, from the city standpoint, if we just look at this through the lens of the local government, the most profitable neighborhoods. And not because we're shortchanging them, but because they actually are built structurally to be more successful places. When we invest, I said earlier, small amounts of love in these places. When we make small amounts of investment in these places, we can radically transform the quality of life there without dislocating anyone, and we can build a lot of wealth for the people living in those neighborhoods without the financial disruption to their lives. We can do this, and to me, I'll use that word moral again. I feel like this is a moral imperative for us to do. It's also just good business. And I think that's where I get frustrated a little bit today, because the sound business thing is to actually take care of our neighborhoods and take care of people.
So Chuck, 2 questions, one brief and I think easy to answer, one to send us off into the night. I'll ask you both of them, but then I'll give you time to think up your answer, because then I want to thank the audience for being here. The first question is, when do we get part 4, A New Hope, if in the Georgia Lucas canon? When can we look forward to that? And then the final question is, send us off into the night and help us wake up tomorrow morning if we're a younger generation thinking, what do we need to do right now to be thinking about purchasing a home, knowing that we want to change the system, but that's going to take time. We operate the way we do today. But before that, I will thank you all for showing up tonight, being a vibrant part of this conversation with your great questions. So many of them we didn't get a chance to get to, but we'll see you all back tomorrow right here for Artificial Intelligence with Tristan Hogue and many more events to come. I want to thank our host, Gannon University, and of course I want to thank our event sponsors, the Erie Community Foundation, as well as Infinite Erie. And I want to thank you, Charles Marohn, Chuck, for being here with us tonight. I appreciate it so much. So, A New Hope, when do we get it? And what do we tell the young generation?
Well, the next book I said I wouldn't work on while my kid was still in school. Books take a lot out of you. So I said, I'm going to start it next year. So it'll be 2026.
We'll get the band together by then.
Yeah.
Young generation purchasing a home, what do we tell them?
I think that this is really, I feel hard saying this because I'm 51. My monthly I live in a huge house in Brainerd in an old neighborhood. It's an old house. It was not very expensive. I live in a poor city. My mortgage payment is $800 a month. It's astounding to me. When I look at my nieces who are paying $3,000, $4,000 a month for houses that, you've got a huge long commute, I feel a lot of pain for young people today because we have handed them a really unfair deck stacked against them. I have a lot of my colleagues who will ask me this too. Should I buy a house? And the thing that I tell them is the federal government has dedicated themselves to making sure that your housing price won't go down. So if you feel like you can actually get into the house, it's maybe the safest investment you can make, even though it's radically overpriced. I don't have a lot of immediate good answers. I actually feel like the new hope, the thing that we should be mobilizing around, is an urgency to actually start dealing with this now. Because what we've done is we've given young people a lot of bad options. Living in your mom's basement is actually a good option today, which is not a great option for having a family and doing prospering in life. I wish I had an easier set of answers for you. I wish there was a trick that made this simple. If you lived near Minnesota, I would tell you move to a small town because I do think small towns have a lot more options. But if you love Erie, and you should love Erie, I would not hesitate to go to a neighborhood that you thought was maybe, I'll use the older language, a little sketchy, but go there and get to know your neighbors. You'll find they're decent people for the most part. Occupy the place, show it some love, fix up your yard, shop at the local place up the street, start building a community, because the way we actually get places back is not individual action. The way we get things back is individual action with each other in a community. And I mean, that's the way out of this.
That's how we escape the housing trap. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for showing up tonight. Chuck Marohn, thank you for being here. Book signing over in room 219. We'll see you over there. Good night, folks.